Okay, today's daf we're going to learn today is Kuf Membet. This week's shiurim are dedicated for Furash Lema, for our dear Eli, Chana, Esther, Bat, Ayala, Hadar, with all our love, Alana and Danny Storch and family, and by Cliff Felig in honor of Minna Perziger Felig on the occasion of her birthday. Mazel Tov, Minna. Okay, we're going to start now. I'll just quickly review from the Mishnah. We were talking about a case. There's a sheet for today, so everyone should follow along. It'll help organize. We started yesterday in the previous shiur about notel adam et bino v'ha'even biyado. A father can carry a child, or a mother for all intents and purposes can carry a child with, even if they're holding a rock in their hand. And we ended with that interesting line both in the Gemara and then in Tosfot about that we're concerned that the child really needs the father to carry him, and it's going to be very hard for the child, and that's why we allow this. And why don't we make him throw the rock out of his hand? And that's because Tosfot says the baby's going to start crying and go crazy, that the rock is not in his hand, and therefore we allow it like this. So then the Gemara says, Ihachi, we're now at the last two words on the page, Ihachi my iria even, afilu dinar nami. If that's the case, then why is it specifically a stone or a rock? Why wouldn't we say the same thing with money? And in fact, Alama Amar Rava says about money, Lo shanu ela even, aval dinar asur. Rava says that it's only an even that we allow, or something like that, but not money. So now it doesn't make any sense. If we said that the problem is that the child's going to be very upset if the father doesn't carry him and he's got the money in his hand, and we can't take the money out of his hand, so why don't we allow the father to carry him when he's got the money in his hand? So here they say with money, there's a separate problem. Sorry, I skipped the word, even. Even inaflala, with the stone, if it falls, lo atevu ala tuye. The father's not going to pick it up because what does the father care about the stone? Now this, by the way, doesn't work so well with Tosfot, because Tosfot said, what do you mean? The kid's crying and screaming, of course you're going to pick that rock up. But the Gemara right now seems to say no. If it fell, in other words, it's one thing to pull it out of the kid's hand. But if the rock fell, the father's not going to pick it up. But if money falls, the father's going to obviously pick up that money. And then we're going to have a separate problem. Then we move out of the issue that we were worried about muktzah. We're now worried that he's going to carry the money, that the father's going to, first of all, directly carry the money, and also he might carry it in public or wherever it might be, but either way, he's going to end up picking up the money. And then he'll actually pick up directly this muktzah object. And therefore, when it comes to money, we don't allow it. When it comes to a stone, we allow it. Tanya Kavateta Rava. Now we're going to bring a proof for Rava. Now this goes back to the beginning. Not the Rava we just had, but Rava says in the beginning of the Gemara on Kuf Mem Aleph Amabet, Hotzi Tinok Chai Bekis Taloi B'Tzavaro Chayav Mishum Kis. Remember, if you take out the baby, I actually put this on the top of the sheet to remind you of the case. If you take a baby from public to private or private to public, and there's a kis around his neck, so we said if the baby's alive, you're not chayav for carrying the baby because chay no seif atzmo, but right, a baby can carry himself, and therefore you're not obligated if you carry him on a Torah level. But the kis is not batel to the child, right? We said the kis does not serve the child really, the pouch around its neck, and therefore you're obligated because you took the pouch out. And then we said if the baby had died and it has this kis around its neck, so then, I actually forgot to mention this, so I put it on the sheet for today, that the kis is not, at this point, you're not obligated for carrying the kis because the kis at this point becomes part of its clothing. It's not serving the child at all. Before we said it wasn't serving the child majorly, but it was somewhat. Here, it's just kind of like clothing on the baby, or potentially you could say, this is not the typical manner of carrying. You don't normally carry something out by having it around a dead person's neck. So because of that, you wouldn't be obligated for the kis. And you're also not obligated for the baby, because remember, it's a malach she'ein tzricha legufa, and it must hold like Rabbi Shimon, the Mishnah. That because you're only carrying it out to get rid of the body, not because you need the body for any sort of purpose. So anyway, that was Rava. So Rava had said that if you take out the baby, well, the baby's alive, and the kis is around its neck, then you are obligated for the kis. So we're now going to have a braita that shows like this. Hamotzi kelav mekupalim umunachim al ktefo v'sandalav v'tavotav biyado chayav. If you carry clothing folded up in a pile, and you're carrying, let's say you're carrying your laundry out or whatever you're carrying out, or you have your jewelry in your hand, not on your finger, but in your hand, you're obligated. But if you were wearing all those clothes, then you'd be exempt. If you carry out a person, now we get to what we were talking about, and he's wearing his clothes, if you carry somebody, now again, you're not obligated for carrying the person, and if the person's wearing clothing, then you're not obligated for the clothing either, because it's but considered batel to the person, right? It's not significant. The person is more significant, and it's just clothing on the person. But ilu hotzian kemot shehen chayav, right? But if you carry them on their own, then you'd be chayav, meaning also if the person was carrying them in his hand and you carried the person, then you'd be obligated, and that matches what we saw about this kiss on the child, because the kiss is not necessarily clothing, not considered clothing, and therefore you'll be obligated. And moving on to the next case in the Mishnah. Kilkalava even bitocha. You have a basket with the stone inside the basket. So you can carry this even though the stone is in the basket. So the Gemara says, how could you possibly carry this? The basket is what we call, it's a classic case. It's a base for something that's forbidden. It's a basket with a rock in it. How could you possibly carry the basket? This is supporting the rock. So, it must be that the basket is full of fruits and it also has a stone inside the basket. Then we can say then what we call this, we talked about it before, it's a basis l'davar hamutar v'hasur. Once it's a basis for both something permitted and something forbidden, we talked about this with the candelabra, right? That the tray underneath is a basis l'davar ha'asur for the candelabra. But if you put a challah roll on it, then already it becomes something you can move. So basically that's what we're talking about. So then they suggest, and this is where Tosfot came in before about the baby, suggested based on this, why don't you just dump everything in the basket? And then you'll take the fruits by hand and put those fruits into the basket. Now put them back in, dump the rock. Right? You can dump it like that with everything. And then put the fruits back in the basket. That would be a much better solution, just like we said with the baby. Why don't you make him dump the rock out of his hand? So, Kid Rabbi Eli Amarav, just like Rabbi Eli Amarav says in a different place, which we're going to see in 3 minutes, Biperot hamitanafim, there he says in a different place, it must be, we're talking about fruits that if you dump them on the ground, they'll get dirty and disgusting and you won't be able to use them anymore, right? We know there's different kinds of fruits. There's fruits, if you dump them on the ground, nothing happens. And then there's fruits, if you dump them on the ground, they'll be disgusting and you'll ruin them and you won't be able to use them anymore, like sticky outside. So, hachinami beperot hamitanafim. Therefore, likewise here, it must be fruits that will get dirty. So in which case, we don't suggest to you, oh, dump everything out, because if you dump everything out, you're going to end up losing everything that you have. So they say, well, let's try something else. Now, I'm not exactly sure the reality of this. To me, it seems like this would be kind of a complicated feat to pull off. But they think that this is okay. Amarava, hacha bekilkala pchuta askinan. De'even gufa na'aseh dofen lakilkala. What we must be talking about here is I'm sorry, did I skip? I skipped the words. V'lena'arinu ne'ure. Why don't we push to the side the fruits? Why don't we just kind of push them to one side and then dump the rock out from the other side? Again, it depends what your basket's like to be able to actually pull this off. So then they say, what we're talking about is, it must be a basket with a hole in the side, and the rock is kind of stuck into the side of the basket, in which case the rock serves a purpose here. The rock is part of it, and that's why we allow it. In other words, now we're going to say it's not because it's full of fruits, it's because the rock is serving a purpose in the basket, and it's no longer what we call a rock that's muksa machmakufo. Okay? So that's, in the end, we say that must be the case. Otherwise, there must be some way you could kind of get the rock out without having to get the fruits knocked out of the basket. Okay, next case in the Mishnah, metaltalim truma. So now we said we're metaltal truma tamea with tahora, even though the truma tamea is supposed to be burned. This is truma produce that becomes impure, which the only thing you could do with it is burn it. So that's clearly muktzah. It serves no purpose anymore. But yet, If it's mixed up with regular good truma or chulin, regular produce, you're allowed to move it. So now the Gemara is going to say, Amar Rav Chisda lo shanu ela shetorah lamata utmea lamala. It depends where it's situated in the basket. We're now going to say, if the tahorah, the good stuff, is on the bottom, and the bad stuff, which is muktzah, is at the top, then we allow it, because you can't access, right, the bottom stuff without, your stuff is at the bottom. So that's why we allow you to move it. But tahorah lamala utmea lamata, but if the tahorah is at the top and your tmeah stuff is at the bottom, well, then we don't allow you to do this. Shakele l'tahorah v'shavek l'tmeah. Basically, we say, take out all the good stuff, which is all at the top. You don't have to move any muktzah stuff to get to it. You could just take out that stuff. And then that's fine. Then put it in a different basket or something, or dump the other stuff, then add the basket, right? Take all your nice stuff out, dump the rest on the ground, put that stuff back in your basket. If you have a way to access the Truma Torah, then you can't carry this whole thing and carry the muktzah stuff with it. That's Rav Chisda. So now the Gemara says, "V'chi tahora lemata nami lishtinu v'linkitinu." Why don't we say, if the Torah is at the bottom, why don't you just, again, like we suggested before, dump the stuff out on the ground. So you don't want to touch it by your hand. Dump it all on the ground, and then you can access your Truma Torah. So they say, Amar Rabbi Eli, and this is where he said it. Remember we said, well, like he says there, he would say the same thing here. So this is where he actually said it. Amar Rabbi Eli, Amar Rav, b'peirot hamitanafi maskinan. It's talking about a case where if you dumped everything on the ground, if you dump the whole basket, now you can't dump, imagine you have Truma Torah, Truma Tameh at the top, Truma Tameh at the bottom. You can't just dump the Truma Tameh. You're going to end up dumping some of the Truma Tahora with it. Because if you're just dumping, you're not going to be able to dump exactly what you want to dump. So therefore, you're going to end up with dumping some of your good produce. And when it gets on the floor, we're obviously, what he says is we must be talking about fruits that can't be dumped. Like it's not oranges, let's say, because oranges, nothing will happen to them if you dump them. But it's talking about items that would get ruined. Okay, like let's say dates. Okay, dates, they'll get disgusting and sticky remember, their floors were made of dirt. It'll get all full of dirt and you won't be able to clean them, right? Imagine those sticky dates. Right? There's no way that you could clean those. So therefore, we're going to say that must be the case. And that's why we don't allow it in that case. Okay, that's why we only allow it in one direction. Now, meitive. Now we're going to have a problem because there's a braita that says, mitaltalin trumat tamea ima teora v'ima chulin. So far, just like our Mishnah. But then it says, bein teora lamala utmea lamata, ubein shetmea lamala uteora lamata. It doesn't matter which order. Tiyuvta de Rav Chisda. This clearly goes against the way Rav Chisda understood our Mishnah, because this says it doesn't make a difference where your truma tahora is. So Amar Lecha Rav Chisda could answer, if you were here to answer, matnitin l'tzorach gufo, braita l'tzorach makomo. There are two different situations. The question is, why are you moving this? There's always two different possibilities as to why you're moving it. There's more, but two that are allowed. You're moving it either because you want the fruits, that's tzorach gufo, or you're moving it because you want the space under the basket. So now let's start with the easier. If you want the space under the basket, then it doesn't make a difference what's on top and what's on the bottom, because you don't care about what's inside. All you want to do is move the basket so that you have that space. Let's say it's in the middle of your table and you need to set your table. So then you can move the whole basket and it makes no difference. That's the braita. Rav Chisda was saying is that we're moving it because we want the fruits. If that's the case, then you're allowed to move it only if the Tamea is at the top blocking your Tahorah, then we allow you. But if the Tahorah is at the top, then we just tell you, take out your fruits from the top, and that's how, and then, we don't allow you to carry it with the Tamea. Okay, that's how he learns this. So now the Gemara says, wait a minute, they have an interesting question. They say, my duchka de Rav Chisda le'ukmei manitin l'tzorach gufo. Now that we have a way, once we learn the braita, we realize that there's a way to explain this case in either direction, meaning Tmei Lamala or Tmei Lamata, it doesn't matter. If it's L'tzorach Makomo. So why did Rav Chisda try to say, oh, by the way, our Mishnahs only went to Horaz Lamata, and that's right, and it's L'tzorach Gufo? Why didn't he say it's L'tzorach Makomo, our Mishnah, and it's you can move it in either direction, because it's always better if the Mishnah doesn't specify only Tahora Lamata. It sounds more likely that the Mishnah would be any kind of way. And if there's no way to explain it, so we're stuck. But here there's a way to explain it. If it's a tzorach makomo, you could say that it would be in either direction. So Amarava, the reason why he really wanted to say it was only l'tzorach gufo that the Mishnah was talking about, and then he'd have to say it's only tahora lamata, was because matnitin kavate daika. The Mishnah makes more sense according to him. Why? The Katani Seifa, one of the upcoming cases in the next Mishnah are ma'ot sha'alakal mena'eret hakar ve'hin aflot. If you have money on your pillow, you can shake the money. Let's say you're about to get into bed on Friday night and you realize there's money sitting on your pillow. So what do? You don't want to lie on your money. So you can shake the pillow. This is what we call tiltu min hatzad, and you can knock it off your pillow. This halacha that you dump it off you do tiltu min hatzad is only if you actually need the pillow, tzorach gufo. Aval l'tzorach mekomo, but let's say you need the space where the pillow is, and the pillow has money on it. So what do we say? Mital tilo va'odan alav. You can carry the pillow with the money on it and just move it aside like that. You don't dump the money off, you carry it with the money on. So what do you see? The case in the Mishnah where it said you dump the money is only a case of where you need it l'tzorach gufo. So since midaseifa l'tzorach gufo, reishanami l'tzorach gufo. Since that later case is l'tzorach gufo only, therefore our Mishnah makes more sense the way Rav Chisda explains it, that it's only talking about l'tzorach gufo, because then you could say this whole section of Mishnayot are referring to cases that we're moving them l'tzorach gufo, and that's what we can assume. Now, it's interesting, this whole lashon of tzorach gufo, tzorach makomo, it's not mentioned in the Mishnah at all, right? But the rabbis of the Gemara are putting it into their terminology of, there's tzorach gufo, tzorach makomo, and etc. I mean, the Braita did say l'tzorach gufo, right? The Braita that we just quoted, Tatzalin, no, it also didn't say. This clearly seems to be these definitions of tzorach gufo makomo. I'm not sure that they existed as clear-cut definitions in the time of the Mishnah. Later, in the time of the Gemara, the rabbis come up with this categorization and then kind of add it back into the Mishnah. Okay, even though the Mishnah maybe was referring to it, but not as categorically as the Gemara was. Okay, next case. Rabbi Yehuda Omer, af ma'alim. Okay, now we have this other thing about ma'alim et hamiduma be'echad u'mea. This means if you have a bundle of truma that mixes up into 100 bundles of non-truma produce, then we say it's canceled, right? It's batel. We can say you're allowed to eat all of those and not worry that it's truma. However, there's one thing you have to do. You have to take out one random bundle, call that bundle truma, and give it to a Kohen so that you don't cause a loss, financial loss for the Kohen. So he says you can even do this on Shabbat. So now we're going to have trouble understanding this. Aren't you fixing, right? You're basically fixing it, just like you can't take truma in general on Shabbat. So how do we allow you to do this? You're basically fixing something, and you're not allowed to fix. Again, you're not exactly fixing a kli. You're clear. It's not makeh b'patish because that's really for kelim. But if we allow you to fix this, people will think that you can fix other things. It's more like a d'Rabbanan tikkun. So why do we allow this? So now we're going to have 3 suggestions just to give you the structure. Each time we're going to say he holds by a particular Tana and their approach to the whole issue of dimua and how it works. And each time we're going to reject it till we get to the 3rd where that's going to actually work. Even then, we're going to have a bit of a question on it, but we're going to answer the question. So Rabbi Yehuda ki Rabbi Eliezer svirale, he holds like Rabbi Eliezer. How so? What's Rabbi Eliezer? Tamal tchuma be'ena machta. When the truma lands into your, okay, this is an interesting, in the world of imagination, this is what he says. He says that your truma falls into your 100 chulin. So you now have this one truma, and then you take out later a random truma. Now, when you take out that random truma, he says, well, it's not exactly random. He views it as if when you put that truma in, and that truma fell in, even though we said it's batel, it's canceled out to what's in. It's not really canceled out. It's as if that truma, imagine, you have everything's black and this one white thing falls in, you're going to still see that white thing. It's going to stand out. You won't ever really be combined. He says when your truma falls in, it's as if it's like it's white in black. And you only see that white thing, and that white thing is separate and distinguished. And therefore, when you eat the black, you're not it's actually was always separated to begin with. It was never really combined. And when you take out that one, you're basically taking out the white one, even though it's no longer white, right? Because what happens is the white falls into the black, gets mixed up. It's no longer white. You can't tell which one is truma anymore. But when you take it out, it's as if that was called truma from the beginning. So what he's saying is you're not actually changing the status of the 100 bundles that were already there, because they were never considered truma. Now, even though this is only in the world of imagination, because the one you're taking out is not the one that fell in, right? Or it's likely not. So therefore, let's read it inside. I just want to translate the words. Truma be'ena machta. Machta means it lands. And be'ena means it's still intact. That truma lands intact and stays truma the whole time, ki'ilu, okay, in imaginary world. And when you take it out, you're basically just taking out something that was already truma to begin with. And the rest of it was always chulin, and it's fine. So how do we see this? So let's see it inside. Ditnan, as it says in the Mishnah. Se'ah truma shenafla lepachot mimea. Okay, so now you have a se'ah that falls into less than 100. V'nidmeu. V'nafal min hamiduma lemakom acher. Okay, so now you have this one, let's just put, for all intents and purposes, let's say it falls into 50. Okay, so it falls into 50 right now, which doesn't cancel it out. But now, it all mixed up. Now you took one bundle from there, and one bundle from there, nafal min hamiduma lemakom acher. It fell from there into something else. So now you have this pile that was all safek truma, right? 1 out of 51 of it was truma. And a bundle from there falls into another batch of chulin, okay? And now let's assume that's also 50, okay? So, Rabbi Eliezer Omer, midamat ketruma vadai. He says that we assume that what came out of that bundle was entirely truma. Because as he says, right, what goes in is truma and what comes out is truma. So we view that since it's safek truma, we're going to assume that potentially this entire bundle could be truma, which means that when it falls into the next bundle, you now again have one bundle that falls into 50, and you're not going to be able to eat it. But Chachamim omrim, ein hamiduma medameh ela lefi cheshbon. He says, what do you mean? What's the status of that? What are the chances that this has truma? 1 in 51 of this is truma, let's say, right? Once it mixes up in all the other bundles, the probability of this being truma is 1 in 51, right? Or so you're going to now take that and put it into something else. Only 1 out of 51 of this is truma. So now when it falls into a batch of 50, it's clearly canceled because there's more than 100 against the truma. So the rabbis basically say, their view is what you would have thought, which is once it falls into the bundle, it's all mixed up. You don't know what's truma, what's not. When you take out this and you call it truma, right? If you don't call it truma and it's just separated, so what are the chances? It all depends on what the chances are of this being truma. But it's not like the truma is be'ein, as we say, intact. Rabbi Eliezer says, no. Since when you take out this bundle, we can assume, right, it could be that this bundle was intact. It's 100% truma. And therefore, when it falls into a new thing, it's not going to be canceled out. So we could say that Rabbi Yehuda holds by him, which means, again, that if the truma is intact, then you can eat the rest of it, because the rest of it, you're not actually fixing anything. It was never messed up. Yeah, it's true there was a truma inside and you had to take that one out, but everything else in there was really fine all along. What's the problem with saying this? The problem with saying this is, Imer da shamat le l'chumra l'kula mishamat le. Rabbi Eliezer's halacha is a chumra halacha. He's being stringent. He's saying, if this falls, well, you have to be careful and assume maybe the worst. But it doesn't mean that he would say it to be lenient. And Rabbi Yehuda is being lenient. He's saying, you can take this out on Shabbat even because you're not fixing anything. It was already fine to begin with. So therefore, let's try option number 2. And here we're going to see someone who is lenient with this law. Elohuda Amar Rabbi Shimon, Kiditnan. Se'at truma shenafla lemea, v'lo ispik lahagbia ad shenafla acheret. Here's another case. One se'ah falls into 100, but you didn't fix it yet. You didn't take out your one se'ah of truma to say basically this is truma and the rest is fine. Then, in the meantime, before you did it, another truma falls in. At this point, you no longer have 100 to 1. You have 100 to 2, which doesn't work. So the question is, what's the halacha? So Rabbi Shimon matir. Okay. Oh, sorry. Harezo asura. According to Tanakama, it's now forbidden because you don't have 100 keneged those, right? You don't have 100 to 1. You have either 50 to 1, 50 to 1, or 100 to 2, however you want to say it. It's all the same. But Rabbi Shimon matil. Rabbi Shimon says this is mutar. Why does he say it's mutar? So if you hold like Rabbi Eliezer before, you could take him and now say this is Rabbi Eliezer and going lenient. Why? Because if you view that truma as be'ena nachta, it basically landed intact, then you basically have one truma that fell into 100, and it's intact, it's truma. When your second one falls in, there's 100 chulin against that second one that falls in. So you see that? You don't view them as together, really. You view them as separate because that truma stays, right? Again, it's white falling into black. You have 100 black. A white fell in, it's still white. So it's not part of the black anymore. Now when the new one falls in, it's just another white falling into 100 black, and it's fine. So there you see, it's intact, and we use this to be lenient and say that you can actually use this. So now the Gemara says, no, you misunderstood the debate between Rabbi Shimon and the rabbis. Mimai, why are you assuming that's their debate? Dil mahatam bahakam miflage. Maybe the root of their machloket is something else. Tanakama savar, and then it wouldn't have to do with Rabbi Yehuda at all. It's not because be'ena machta that it landed intact, but Tanakama savar afal gav denaflu bezeh charzeh keman denaflu babata chatami. Even though they fell one after the other, it's as if they fell all at once. Now, if two fall into 100, that's not going to be canceled. The hala chamishim nafla, v'hala chamishim nafla. Okay, they put it as 50, right? I would say more 2 into 100, but they say it's as if one fell into 50 and one fell into 50, and that's not going to work. The Rabbi Shimon saval kamaita batel b'mea, v'hati batel b'mea v'chad. What does Rabbi Shimon say? When that white fell into the black, what happened? It turned black, right? It became nullified. So now that it's nullified, when the second one falls in after, it's now falling into 101 of chulin, basically. It's true you have to fix it and take a truma out, but it's still all considered chulin right now. Till you take that out and call it truma, nothing's really truma here. So therefore, it would work for that reason, but that's not explaining Rabbi Yehuda. Still, you need to take out that one in order to allow you to eat the whole anything here. Legally, it's all nullified, but technically speaking, you're going to have to separate one until we allow you to eat any of it. So that won't work. So now we're still worried with Rabbi Yehuda seems to be allowing to fix something on Shabbat. So Elahuda Amal Rabbi Shimon ben Elazar. He must hold like this Tana. D'Tanya, Rabbi Shimon ben Elazar omer, noten enav b'tzad zeh ve'ochel mitzad acher. What do you do if this happens? You look at one side and you say in your head, either you have to, again, whenever we say machshava, it's not clear, you have to actually express it or think it in your head. But either which way, you don't actually have to do anything. All you have to do is think or recite something and say, this side's going to be where my truma is going to be taken from. I'm going to eat from the other side right now. And on Shabbat, you can do that. Okay? So if that's allowed, comes Rabbi Yehuda to say, well then, since I could already have eaten from there beforehand, there's no problem to take out my truma one because I'm not fixing anything. I'm allowed to eat anyway just by machshava on Shabbat, and therefore it's not fixing. However, the Gemara is going to have a question on this. How can you say Rabbi Yehuda holds like Rabbi Shimon ben Elazar? He actually disagrees with him about this. D'Tanya, how do we know? It says in a Braita, and this is exactly our case. Rabbi Yehuda omer ma'alim et hamiduma be'echad u'mea. He says you can take out the truma on Shabbat. And Rabbi Shimon ben Elazar says, omer, noten enav b'tzad zeh ve'ochel mitzad acher. He doesn't allow you to take it out. He only allows you to do machshava. He doesn't think you could do an action. He thinks you could just do it in your head. So, or by speaking. So when he says that you can't say Rabbi Yehuda holds like Rabbi Shimon ben Elazar, he clearly disagrees with him. They're opposites they have different opinions in the Mishnah. They're not exactly opposite, but again, each one comes up with a solution, but a different solution. Rabbi Shimon ben Elazar clearly wouldn't hold like Rabbi Yehuda. He thinks that you can't separate one out. Otherwise, why would you do machshava? You would just separate it out. He says you have to think, oh, my truma is going to come from there, therefore I'll eat from this side. So which obviously, by the way, wouldn't work if it's a liquid, right? It's only going to work because you can separate here and say, well, there's this side, there's the right side and the left side, and I can separate. If it's wine, let's say, you can't do that. That's where we'll get into the whole thing. I'm not sure if we've come across it yet, but it comes up many times about what you do if you didn't take your truma on Shabbat, and we call it's a whole issue of breira. But anyway, we'll get to that another time. So now the Gemara says, Rabbi Yehuda adifam and Rabbi Shimon ben Elazar. Rabbi Yehuda's logic is based on Rabbi Shimon ben Elazar. He builds off of him because he says, if what Rabbi Shimon ben Elazar says is true, that you can do machshava and then eat the other side, then I'm going to take him one step farther. It's true, Rabbi Shimon ben Elazar doesn't agree with Rabbi Yehuda, but Rabbi Yehuda agrees with Rabbi Shimon ben Elazar and says, based on what you're saying, if machshava allows it, then I'm not actually fixing anything when I do it on Shabbat. So therefore, since it can be eaten without my fixing, therefore, right, it's funny logic. It's saying, since you can do that, I can do what I think, which is I can then take it out because I'm not actually fixing anything. So in the end, he must hold like Rabbi Shimon ben Elazar, and he kind of builds on him and takes him one step farther. New Mishnah. Ha'evan shel pia chavit. Let's say you have a stone on top of a barrel. How do you want to get to your wine? So what do? Mate al tzida v'hi nofelet. You tilt your barrel and the stone falls. Again, tiltul min hatzad, as we say. Indirect. Hayta ben hachaviyot. Let's say it's between other barrels. And what's going to happen? If you knock that stone, we're assuming it's a big stone, and you tilt the barrel and the stone falls, it could knock into another barrel and it could break the barrel. So you'd have to imagine big stone and maybe not such a solid barrel. Like I would think, how's a stone going to break a barrel? But first of all, we'll see in the Gemara, they bring a bright to where maybe there's other things that it could break, like glass, which is much more likely a stone would break glass. But also it depends what their barrels were made of, and maybe how big their stones were, and maybe the stone is big enough that it could break a barrel. Ma'ot al gabe hakal. So if it's nofel ben chaviyot, so what do? Magbia umate al tzida v'nofelet. You can lift the barrel, move the barrel to a different place where there's nothing else there. While it's there, tilt it, knock the rock off, and then we'll see in the Braita, it says you can even then bring it back to where it was, which makes sense. Shouldn't be an issue at that point. There's certainly no muktzah anymore. Ma'ot sha'alakal. This we mentioned before. If you have money on your pillow, mina'er etakar v'henoflo. You can shake the pillow and the money falls. Hayta lav lishleshet. Mikan chaber smartut. If you had clothing with a stain on it, like a piece of dirt or something, so then, or Rashi says it could be rok, saliva, or tsoah, or feces. So mikan chaber smartut, you can wipe it with a cloth. No water, Rashi says, because water is washing. Hayta shel ol, but if it was leather, notznin aleha mayim ad shtichle. In this case, you can use water until you get it out. And why is that? Because you don't generally wash leather with water. I was thinking about, right, you have leather chairs, you would never wash them with water, they get ruined. So likewise here, since it's actually funny that they're telling you wash it with water when water can kind of ruin leather, but maybe it doesn't ruin all leather. And basically, since that's not the general way you launder leather, you're allowed to put water on it, but not on clothing. Amar Rav Huna Amar Rav. So now let's go back to this case with the rock on the barrel. So Amar Rav Huna Amar Rav, Lo shanu ela b'shocheach. By the way, this isn't where you purposely put the rock on to be a cover for your barrel, which is probably what we thought in the beginning. It must be, using the rock as a cover. No, it's only when you forgot it there. Let's say you put it there. Now maybe you put it as a cover, but you meant to take it off before Shabbat. You didn't want it to be there on Shabbat, but you forgot about it. Aval b'meiniach, but if you put it there on purpose, usually forgetting means you kind of just put it down. Let's say you were holding the rock and you needed a place to put it down, and you put it down and you meant to take it off and you forgot. But if you put it there on purpose, then then this barrel becomes a base for something forbidden. This is what we talked about earlier. And therefore, you wouldn't be allowed to move the barrel at all. Hayta ben achaviyot. So now the Gemara is going to ask something, and I'm already prefacing this by telling you that I'm not reading Rashi's commentary here. I'm going by Tosfot's commentary. Tosfot's commentary to me seemed like a much simpler, a better fit with the pshat of the Gemara, so I chose to go with his commentary for this sugya. But Rashi has a very different interpretation. Man Tana, who's the Tana who holds in our Mishnah? Now, what did we say? If it's between barrels, we're allowed to move the barrel. Now, theoretically, you could have said you can move the rock. out of the way, right? Pick it up. Instead of dumping it, maybe we'd allow you to pick it up. So what does that seem to indicate? It seems to indicate to kol hecha diika isura vehetera, when there's isur and heter. Vehetera tarchinan, ve'isura lo tarchinan. We only allow you to deal with the heter. We basically say, carry the barrel, don't carry the rock. Okay? So who's the Tana who holds this way, who matches the Tana of our Mishnah? Meaning, who wrote this Mishnah? Who's the author? Whose logic does it go by? So Amar Rabbi Bar Chana, Amar Rabbi Yochanan, Rashbaki. It must be Rabban Shimon ben Gamliel. Why? Titnan, haborer kitnit b'yom tov. There's a whole debate about borer and yom tov. We learned about which melachot, certain melachot are allowed because of ochel nefesh. But it's not like a heter across the board. You could do anything. You can't start cutting your crops on yom tov. So what can you do? What can't you do? So there's a debate about borer. Are you allowed to separate the bad from the good? Okay, generally borer, if you're doing it in certain criteria, you could do good from bad, but not bad from good in certain ways. So a borer kitnit b'yom tov, you're separating your grains, your legumes. Beit Shammai omrim borer ochel ve'ochel. You can only take the good parts, the parts that you want, you can take out from the bad and eat. Beit Hillel omrim borer kedarko b'cheiko b'tamchut. So he says, no, you can do borer in its normal way, meaning even taking the bad out, separating the bad parts from the good. B'cheko in your lap or your chest, u'b'tamchui, or even with a utensil, but a particular utensil that doesn't actually, what's different about a tamchui from some of the other utensils that we use for borer? They're much bigger and people would use them for large quantities. And then it's going to look like you're doing it for after Yom Tov, or maybe you are going to do it for after Yom Tov. So we allow it in a particular way, Beit Hillel says. Vitanya. And now here comes the Braita and here comes the Rashbam. Amar Rabban Shimon ben Gamliel. Bamed dvarim amurim. In which case does Beit Hillel allow this? Sha'ochel meruba al psolet. If there's more food than bad, then what are we going to say? Then we'll allow you to take the bad out of the good. Now, according to Rashi, it has to do with tircha, because think about it. If you have a lot of good and a little bit of bad, if we make you take the good out of the bad, you're going to end up having to work much harder. If we allow you to take out the 5 little bad pieces, that would actually make your job easier. But according to Tosfot, the issue isn't easy or not easy. It's that when ochel is meruba al psolet, then the psolet is nullified to the food. Okay, so therefore, they allow you to take out the psolet because the psolet is only significant in and of the fact that it serves the food. This is very similar to what we talked about before with carrying, right? If something's nullified to something else, then you can actually carry it. So likewise here, the psolet is nullified to the food, in which case we allow you to get rid of the psolet because it's serving the food, so we allow that. But if more of it is the bad, the stuff that you don't want, then divrei hakol borer ochel. Okay, borer ochel, meaning then everyone agrees that you can only do the ochel and not the psolet, because in that case the psolet is not nullified; it's in existence. Because it's in existence, you can't. Right, and it's basically saying that if it's batel, if it's nullified, then it's insignificant, and then you're actually allowed to move it. Okay, you can move it because you're moving it for the purposes of the food. But if it's significant, then it's psolet, and psolet is muktzah, and then it can't be carried. So likewise, what does this have to do with our Mishnah? Again, this isn't the easiest sugya to figure out. That's why Rashi has a totally different pshat. Tosfot pshat isn't perfect either, but they each have a different way of understanding. According to Tosfot, what's happening is the comparison is our barrel to our rock. You're allowed to move the barrel. Why? Because the rock is subordinate to the barrel, right? It's not significant. It's as if the rock, sorry, one second. Let me get it straight. According to this, the ochel is, the rock, No, sorry, I'm already explaining the next thing. We're basically saying this is like, I got confused because of the question of the Gemara, but it's like psolet merubah la'ochel here, they're kind of saying, which we're basically saying when you have heter and you have isser, you have a barrel and you have a rock, and they're both important, let's say, at this point we're going to say that, then you're allowed to move only the heter and not the isur, right? Just likewise, when you have a lot of psolet and also ochel, you're only allowed to move the ochel and not the psolet. Okay, that's what we're saying right now. So comes the Gemara and they say, wait a minute, what are you talking about here? What do you mean? The barrel is much more important than the rock on top of the barrel. It's more like the rock should be nullified to the barrel, which means if you want to get your wine out, you should be allowed to pick up that rock and move it, just like you could take the psolet out of the ochel. It's the exact opposite of what Rashbag is saying. So they say, no, that's not true. Hachanami got also here, kevan ibai lemishkal lo mitka leyayin ad shakale le'even. And Rashi, by the way, has a different gear, so it's not the Evan, it's something else, because otherwise the pshat of Rashi doesn't make sense. Kipsolet meruba ala ochel dami. Okay, so what does he say? He says, no, this stone is significant. Why is it significant? Because you can't get to the wine without moving it. That already gives it importance. Since you can't access the wine without moving the stone becomes significant, in which case, it's like psolet meruba ala ochel. It might not be more than the barrel, but in terms of significance, it's just as significant as the barrel, which means that we end up with a case, again, we're back to the beginning, where we have psolet and ochel, or what we would say in the words of the Gemara, we have heter and isur. We have both the rock and the barrel. One's heter, one's isur. We only allow you to move the barrel, okay? Even though, right, and this, according to Tosfot, the rock is not insignificant to the barrel, and that's why it's considered, and that's why it must match Rashbag, who holds that you can only move the heter. Okay, back to this case about Hayta ben Achaviyot Magbia. So you can lift the whole barrel and move it somewhere else so that it doesn't break anything. So here's the bright I mentioned before, which goes into a little more detail. Tanya Rabbi Yossi Omer Hayta Chabit Munacha Be'otzar. If it was in a storage house with lots of other barrels, or there were glass utensils right underneath, then magbia lemakom acher, you can actually lift it and move it to somewhere else. Umatel tzidan, then you knock it over. V'hinofelet, and the rock will fall off. V'notel himenu mashet tzarich lo machzira limkoma. Then you can put right. You can then take what you need out of the barrel, and then you can put it back where it belongs. Ma'ot she'alakar. Now we're going to get back to this case. So we have and this we already learned. We're going to see it's only the tzorach makomo. So Amar Rav Chia bar Ashi Amarav lo shanu ela b'shocheach. Again, we're going to say, although it's not the same person who said it in the previous section of the Mishnah, there it was Rav Huna in the name of Rav. Here it's Rav Chia bar Ashi in the name of Rav. They both quoting Rav's name, but different people. That again, we're talking about that you didn't put the money there on purpose, but you accidentally left the money there. Okay, if you put it there on purpose, then the pillow becomes a basis l'davar hasur, and then obviously you can't move it. Amar Rabba Bar Chana Amar Rabbi Yochanan lo shanu ela l'tzorach gufo. This is what we said before. It's only if you need the pillow, let's say, to sleep on. Aval l'tzorach mekomo, if you just need the space where the pillow is, mital telo v'odan alav, then you just move the pillow with the money on top of it. He also had a brighter that says this. He said the exact same thing in a brighter. Okay, so now we're going to talk about another case. Let's say you leave your wallet in the courtyard and you're worried that someone's going to steal it. This is the category. It's not tzorach makomo. It's not tzorach gufo, because you don't need the money on Shabbat. That would be gufo. You don't need the space in the courtyard. That would be makomo. What do you need? This is what we call mechama letzel. You want to protect it. Sometimes you want to protect something from the sun. Here you want to protect it from getting stolen. So what do you do? So you can put on the wallet a baby or a loaf of bread. A funny thing, they say these two things. Some of the Fresh will explain why do they say these two things? Because they're small. Really, it could be anything. They're just trying to think of something light that's not so heavy that you would use, because you're not going to obviously bring something huge and heavy. So they pick those two things, put one of those down, umatalta, and they both have chashivut. They're both important. It has to be something of importance. And then you can carry them both together. Okay, and that's your solution. We'll see later that this doesn't really work with halacha, but they're suggesting right now it does. And not only this is he suggesting it, but another opinion on Rabbi Yitzchak, shachach leveina b'chatzer. If you left a brick and you want to bring the brick inside so it doesn't get ruined, and it's only for building, you can't use it, but meniach aleh kikaro tinoko metaltala. So you're allowed to do it in this way. Amar Rabbi Yehuda bar Shila amar Rabbi Asi. Now he's going to give a case where they actually did this. They left a satchel full of money in the public domain, right? Stratya, like street. We've seen that before. It's from the Greek. Ubal v'shalu et Rabbi Yochanan, v'amar lehen, and Rabbi Yochanan said, Hanichu ala kikaro tinok b'tiltilua. Go for it. Amar Mar Zutra, hilchata kechol hanishmatata b'shocheach. Mar Zutra says, this is all, by the way, we paskin this way, except only if you forgot it there, not if you let's say you put it there on purpose, and then you got worried over Shabbat. Oh my God, I can't believe I put my wallet there thinking it would be okay, and it's not, and I got to bring it inside. Then you can't do it. Only if you forgot it there, then we allow you to do this. It's interesting that we allow things, right, for forgetful people, and they forgot something there, we allow you to do this. But here comes Rav Ashi and rejects everybody. Rav Ashi amar afilu shachach nami lo. If you remember, we talked about this. If you have a dead body and you want to move the dead body, either to get it out of the sun, it's rotting in the sun, you're allowed to bring a kikar or tinok and move it. But that's because of kavod habriot, right? There's a dead person there. We want to respect the dead person. Not for just your money. That's not the same. So therefore, he says it's only in that case. So now we have a bayamanach kafa akipe. He put a spoon on bundles of wheat. Rava manach sakina abar yonah. He put a knife on top of a piece of raw meat from a dove. Umetaltala, and they carried it. So again, here you see it doesn't have to be a kikar tinok. It could be anything. Amar of Yosef, kama charif hashmatita dedardike. Well, what are these young children? They think they know what they're talking about. What are you doing? They only said it b'shocheach if you forgot it. These things people left there on purpose. How can you move them? So each one's going to give the same kind of answer. Amar Abaye, ilav de adam chashuv ana. If I wasn't an important person, kafa akipe lamali, I wouldn't even need to carry it that way. I could have carried it directly. Hachazu lemizgalayu, because you could actually sit on these bundles of wheat. You can use them for sitting on. So therefore, they're not actually really muktzah. But because I'm an adam chashuv, I didn't want people to misconstrue what I did, and therefore I did it in this manner. Okay, but it was allowed, obviously. And Amarava, same thing. Ani lavandam chashuvana sakina baryona lamali hachazele umtza. I could eat it raw if I wanted. This meat is meat that you can eat raw, and therefore, even though it's not valid for eating, you would think, but really I could eat this raw. People eat this raw, and therefore it wasn't even muktzah. But because it wasn't adam chashuv, I wanted to do it in this way. So now the Gemara says, Tamad chazil umtza. It sounds like only because you could have eaten it raw. Halo chazil umtza lo. But it sounds like if it couldn't have been eaten raw, if it was meat that couldn't have been eaten raw, then you couldn't eat it. Now, meat that can't be eaten raw can be given to dogs. So theoretically, it's not muktzah. But, so do you want to say, Lamemar de Rava, ki Rabbi Yehuda sfirale? You want to say that Rava holds like Rabbi Yehuda? Remember, Rabbi Yehuda is more stringent definition of muktzah. He says if your food was going to be eaten by a person, but let's say you didn't cook it yet, and it's raw, and it can't be eaten raw, then even though you could feed it to your dogs, it's still going to be muktzah. Rabbi Shimon says, who cares what you thought beforehand? It could be eaten by dogs, so it's not muktzah. So basically, we're going to say, do you want to say that Rava holds like Rabbi Yehuda, and that's why he said only because it could be eaten raw, but if it couldn't be eaten raw, no? Hama Rava l'shami, didn't you say it was shamash? Taveli bar avza v'shade mea l'shunra. He said, roast me up some duck on Shabbat, on Yom Tov, he said this, roast me up some duck, and I'll give the innards to the cat. Now, if you hold like Rabbi Yehuda, then you can't give the innards to the cat, because it was all for human consumption. So I'll just finish this last line. Hatam kevan de misrach da'atei lavei me'etmo. Since he knew before Yom Tov it was going to rot, he knew that he wasn't going to eat the innards, and he knew that he was going to give them to the cat. And that's why he was able to give it to the cat. But theoretically, you could say he does hold like Rabbi Yehuda. Okay, and tomorrow we'll finish up before the next Mishnah with how we know that Rava actually really does hold like Rabbi Yehuda, that if it was supposed to be for human consumption, then we can't say, oh, it's not muktzah if it's for animal consumption. Okay, that will finish for today, and we'll pick up from here tomorrow and finish. We're actually finish the parak tomorrow and start parak Eslim B'Shtayim. Have a good day.